Welcome to Fresh Takes on Tech. I'm Vonnie Estes, and today we're talking with Anthony Howcroft, Executive Chairman, Founder at Swarm Engineering, a company using AI to solve big, messy supply chain problems. I've known Anthony. I had to look this up actually because it feels like I've known you forever, but it's only been 4 years somehow. But every time I talk to you, I kind of get my mind blown about some kind of new technology or ways of using technology that I hadn't thought of. So I'm super excited to have this conversation, and we'll try to keep it within the confines of the time because I know you and I can end up, going all different directions. But what I want to make sure we cover is touching on agentic AI. Last time I saw you in Chicago, we had this great conversation about quantum computing, which I want to kind of blow people's minds on that. And then also a little different than my normal produce and technologies. I'd love to talk to you a little bit about how you use AI in the creative writing you do, because I think that's just helps people think about AI.
Yeah.
So that's great. So welcome to the show. And let's start out with Swarm. So your platform helps optimize complex supply chain. Talk to us about what Swarm does in kind of layman's terms, and who does it help?
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for having me here, Vonnie. I appreciate it. I can't believe it's only 4 years either. But I think we've just been at so many shows and events together. That's why it feels like we've been doing lots together. Yeah. In terms of Swarm is really about helping planners and operations teams make better decisions to save money and increase margins. But the best way of actually looking at it is to give you a real example. Mm-hmm. So one of our customers is a major blueberry grower, and they've got about 15,000 or so temporary field workers that they use to pick the fruit. Okay, so every week they have to decide who to hire, and that's based on what fruit is ripe, what the demand plan is. And some of the workers are fast, some are better at asparagus, some live closer, some live further away. They might get paid different rates, and you want to hire the best workers consistently week in, week out as well. And what's more, the workers also get picked up from 4,000 different bus stops. And there are 6 different types of vehicles that pick the workers up. And not all of the vehicles, some of them are coaches, some are SUVs and things. Not all of them can actually reach all of the bus stops. There might be a mountain village with snow one week or something. So what Swarm does is take all of that data and complexity and find the optimum workforce plan for this week, and the best way to pick those people up to minimize the cost and reduce the carbon output and make sure they hit all the picking goals they need to hit that demand plan. So it's the sort of job that would take previously hours or days with people bent over spreadsheets.
Yeah. Texting each other's in Excel spreadsheets.
Exactly. Yeah. But with Swarm, we can literally do it in minutes, make a better decision as well, and save time and money, and yet still leave the humans in control of the process. So that's really what Swarm's all about, helping those operational processes be better.
So in that example, which is a great example, like who's putting the data in, like where those bus stops are, where those workers are, or whatever, and then how does that information get back out to the people that have to make the decisions of where to drive to, for example?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if you think about any system like that, there's 2 typical sources of data. One of them is there'll be some ERP or some TMS or WMS or whatever acronym you want to use. There's some transactional system where data is coming through on things like the orders, for example. So we will stream that data directly into our platform. We'll build the pipelines to stream it in. But there's a second type of data, which is often that tribal local knowledge. So it might be they've got a spreadsheet where they just keep a list of all the workers. Or it might be a spreadsheet with a list of all of the vehicle types and the drivers and things. So what we do with that is we typically fold that into the platform. So we can have data, we call it hydration. So we can have like a schema of data, and we'll hydrate by pulling in data from a transactional system. But we'll also have some data that might permanently live there. And instead of it now being in a spreadsheet, it gets managed inside the platform. So maybe that list of vehicle types, for example. And at the other end, in terms of how do you give it out, You can do it within the tool, and we've got BI tools built in and stuff, so you can look at Tableau or Power BI and look at your reports. Or you can push it out to a report or an Excel spreadsheet again, but with the results there. Or you can just publish it into another application. So if there was an application that you were using to communicate with the workers, or they all have a mobile phone app, you could just publish it or send them an SMS text, for example.
Excellent. I've heard several other examples of things that Swarm have worked on, and I'm going to move off of that because there's lots of other things I would ask you, but I'm going to have some discipline here and just tell people to go to your website and, give you a call if they want to hear more examples. But you guys are doing a lot of interesting things in agriculture, some specialty crops, some other types of crops, but it's pretty amazing. So we'll move on. So you talk a lot about agentic AI, and people who are somewhat involved in AI, have heard the term. I got to say, I was at CES in January, and listening. The first talk I went into, they must have said it 20 times, and finally on the way out, I just turned to this, smart looking woman next to me and said, "What is that?" So I think it's starting to pop up more and more. So explain to us what it is and how it's different from generative and predictive.
Okay, well, I'll build up from a base and get to agentic because it's easier to understand it in pieces. So imagine you had to build a computer model of a school, okay, and it would include all the lessons, all your friends if you were at the school, say all the friends, the teachers, the classrooms, the lunchroom, everything. And then maybe what you want to do is see what happens if you add a new lesson, like a philosophy subject or something it's put in. Or maybe you want lunch break to be half an hour longer. So what is the impact of that going to be across this great big complicated model? How's it going to impact everyone as well? Is it going to make the students happier? Are the teachers going to be mad? How's it going to work? So that kind of model, I can tell you, is really complicated and very hard to build. And I know that because I actually tried it, because at my school, which is the biggest school in Europe, which is Banbury School when I was there, we had a computer with a 4K memory, and I had to build a system to do exactly that as a school project. Wow. And when you've got 5,000 students and several thousand teachers, that's not very easy to even fit in the memory. So it's a really complicated, hard thing to build. And that's how we typically build a lot of our hard, supply chain problems and things, big, complicated things. So let's look at, there's a different way of doing that, which is instead of making one big model, what you can do is create lots of tiny models, which are agents. So you have an agent to represent each student, one for each teacher, one for each classroom, one even for the school bus. So you've got one little piece of software that represents each thing in that ecosystem. And then each of those tiny programs knows what they do. So I'm a teacher, I need to be in room 4 at 9 a.m. Or I'm a student, I do philosophy but not Spanish. So these are the sort of things that the agents know about themselves. And then what you do is you let the agents talk to each other. And if they talk to each other, they can solve problems. So instead of me trying to figure out this highly complicated thing, what happens if I add philosophy in and the whole thing falls over, I actually just let the system do it itself, because the agents would just talk to each other and figure it out. And whilst that seems a bit weird, it's officially a multi-agent system. It's actually how nature solves all complex problems. So it's how ants work, it's how bees work. And funnily enough, it's how your brain is working right now, because neurons are agents and a whole collection of them. Your brain is a multi-agent system of neurons working together to solve problems. So that's what an agent system is, okay? Now, here's where it gets really cool. If you give those agents some artificial intelligence so they can start to learn and make decisions on their own, then that's agentic AI, because they start to have agency. So what happens is you suddenly get a smart system with all these little helpers that can figure things out for themselves and actually take decisions. So in the school example, an agentic AI system could look at a new timetable and say, if we move philosophy to Tuesday mornings, more students are going to enjoy it because they won't have just finished track and be dripping with sweat, for example. So it doesn't just give you the information with agentic, it actually figures tasks out and puts the plan into action. So agentic AI, it could be just a single agent doing, your travel booking, or it could be a team of agents working to make decisions and get things done for you. So it's software agents that have agency because they've got intelligence built in. That's essentially what we're talking about with agentic AI.
That's such a great description. So all sorts of things I think about that of then you don't, it feels like the person is further away from the decision making. And so how do you know that your agent isn't schizophrenic or gone crazy or hallucinating or something? Like a lot of decisions get made that you're not watching as closely, I guess. And so how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one. We get asked a lot about that.
Yeah.
So I think there are agents for different scenarios. So for example, there is a software agent already in your car, which is the ABS braking system. And every time, if you put your brake down on ice, which you probably don't get very often in California, but if you put your foot down and you're on gravel or something, and you'd normally be skidding along and have an accident, what the ABS does is obviously it puts the brake on, it takes it off so you don't skid. So it goes on and off every, hundreds of times a millisecond. Imagine if that agent said, do you want the brake on still or not? Every millisecond. It clearly isn't going to work. You have to have that agent operating in its real time, which is much faster than we operate, to make those decisions and do it for you. You wouldn't want it asking you for a decision. So in some scenarios, you want the agent to do the decisions because of the time implication. But there are other scenarios. Let's say I'm doing my monthly production plan. I don't necessarily want the system to just tell all of my machines and my employees, this is the plan, go and do it. Maybe I want to check that plan first and make sure it looks sensible to me as the person who's been doing it for the last 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So in that scenario, you could have the agents put the plan together, and there could be a team of agentic AI things making that, but you'd still want to review it. So there'd be an agent whose job is to confirm the plan with you before you execute it. So I think it's often about the time, but it's also about control. So you want to, in some circumstances, you want autonomous agents to make decisions for you, safety, real-time stuff. And in others, you want to give the choice back to the human when the agents have come up with some recommendations and actually let you decide what you want to do in terms of actioning it.
You're pitching a future where businesses achieve superhuman performance through tech. Sounds a little bit like a marketing spin. What's the reality behind that claim and what do you do with that?
Well, it's very simple. Basically, AI can do things that humans just can't do. So it can process more information, it can spot patterns that we might miss, and it can do it in a time frame that's impossible for us to work in, like that braking system. So let me give you another concrete example. So our very first customer was actually a very big food producer, and they were making a very well-known breakfast cereal, and they had 40 silos of grain, and they needed to blend away the contaminants like long thin barley because this was a gluten-free product. So every day what they did is they basically needed to blend 3 silos from the 40 to get rid of those contaminants. And so if you're looking at how many ways you can blend 3 silos out of 40, there are 10,000. So they had a spreadsheet which would highlight the best choice, and the planner would then decide which one to use. They then took that approach to a second site where they had to pick 8 silos from 200 for the production run. But it turns out that means the spreadsheet needs 85 trillion rows. The combinatorial math explosion.
Oh my God.
If I say to you, could you look through a spreadsheet with 85 trillion rows, which was the best one in an hour, is what they had to do every day.
Yeah.
That's where you need AI. And that's where Swarm can use AI to analyze the data and show you the top options. So essentially, you're still making a choice, but you're being given the best options to choose from. So you're super enhancing the human capabilities by looking at billions and trillions of things which you just couldn't do if you were a human trying to achieve it. That's where it's superhuman performance. AI can just do things. I'll give you one other little one I particularly love, was one of the early tests of AI was they analyzed all of the whales singing in the Atlantic. And they discovered that the AI could identify every single whale from its song and from the frequency and things. But again, how many humans can do that? You might have one expert who's done nothing but work with whales and sounds do it. But for most of us, that's a superhuman performance level. It's just something we can't do. So AI can do things we can't. Therefore, that's why we talk about superhuman performance with AI, because it just does things in a way that we can't achieve.
So along with that is being superhuman, then do we trust it? So you've written and talked about trustworthy AI. And so do you think it will really be trustworthy, or, what are the ethics around that?
Yeah, I think this is fascinating. I already trust AI more than I trust most people. So I think the real question is, do you think people will ever be trustworthy?
Yeah.
And what I would say is, we all know AI can suffer from bias and hallucinations, but then so do people. This is we already know that.
Good point. You never say that, right?
Yeah. So I would argue that people do it far more frequently than AI. And we're holding AI up to a gold standard that we don't achieve as humans on a regular basis. So the interesting thing is, we can teach AI and we can train it to remove bias and minimize hallucinations. And we can also build in transparency features so we can see how it's thinking. If only it was as easy to do that with people too.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because everyone comes in with a bias and some of us hallucinate sometimes. And,
Exactly.
That's so true. So let's move into AI versus quantum computing. When we talked recently in Chicago, you were talking to me about just the times where it's going to be used, what the differences are, and places where quantum computing might outpace AI and places where AI is better. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So maybe we should talk about what quantum actually is first. Mm-hmm. Most people have a fairly good idea of AI now, having played with all these tools, but are puzzled by quantum. So people typically have a vague idea about Schrodinger's cat, but how it can actually help seems very mysterious. So quantum computing basically exploits some very peculiar physical phenomenon that occur at small scales, like superposition and entanglement. And that means for some very specific types of problems, it can change the game by potentially delivering answers much more quickly than AI, or actually answering questions that are presently out of reach for the current AI systems. So you'll be glad to hear I'm not going to try and explain how it works, because I don't have a PhD in physics, and maybe all the readers and listeners don't either.
Yeah. We'll just assume that it works. And it's interesting, because with AI, I think last year everyone was trying to explain how it works, but it's like, you don't need to know how your car works or your TV works. It just works. And so we'll just assume that quantum computing works and continue.
Yeah. Well, so we've been doing a project with a company called Inflection, who are based in Chicago, who are a quantum specialist. And I have to say, it's been really interesting. It has shattered some of the myths I personally had about quantum. So first of all, it's much closer than people think. So I keep hearing it's 10 years out from the mainstream. I even saw that on an Apple TV series recently, where they said, quantum's 10 years out.
Oh.
I think it's more like 3 years. I think it's coming. And because AI's there, AI is going to help accelerate it as well, I think, and bring it in faster, because they'll use AI to solve some of the problems in how they're building quantum, because these things are force multipliers. So I think what we're going to see is a lot of hybrid systems where AI and quantum divide up tasks to play to their strengths. And in terms of how that might work in agri-food, I think a good way of thinking of quantum is it's going to be very similar to AI in that it's going to tackle the same type of complex optimization problems. So supply chain planning, yield or demand forecasting, all of the big meaty challenges, production planning, all of those sort of things. And it will be quite expensive early on, because the gates and the chips are expensive to build. which is another reason why hybrid will be where it starts. But I think a good way of thinking about it is to just see it as another tool in the AI box. It's another type of algorithm, another type of approach. And for certain problems, maybe, I don't know, full basket analysis or some other big complex supply chain problems, it's going to be amazing. But actually, for a lot of other categories, AI is going to continue to be the best option because it's cheaper and it's become very efficient. We're very good with classical AI. So I think the way I would look at it is quantum is coming. It is going to do things that we can't do with classical AI. But classical AI is getting better and is using GPU chips and moving forward all the time. So it's a sort of race going on at the moment. And classical is definitely in the lead, but quantum scales differently from classical. So at a certain point, quantum will overtake. So the real thing is, rather than exactly as you said about AI, getting hung up on how does it work, just think of it, it's an algorithm. And for certain types of problems, ones that if you've got a problem you can't solve today with AI, it may be that quantum is going to be the way we solve that in the future. So you still have to do all the things we do at Swarm, which is you have to define a problem and structure it, and then you pass it either to AI or to quantum to solve. That's what will really happen. And I think for me, the biggest challenge is the thing we've really learned from going through the process of doing this is that when you talk to people about quantum, if you thought data scientists were hard to talk to, go and have some conversations with some PhD physicists about quantum. And so I think what you're going to find is AI will be used to translate a classical approach into a quantum approach, because I think it's going to be very difficult to get enough people in your business who are going to be able to understand quantum well enough to just build it. You'll need to be able to, generate a template for a quantum algorithm, for example.
So how will that get in users' hands? Like with Swarm, you don't really need to tell people that you're using it. It doesn't matter. You're just supplying some kind of product. I mean, will the user interface be different if you're using quantum, or will it just be kind of a tool that you're using in your solution?
Yeah, I think it's much better to think of it as a tool you're using. So some of the setup might be slightly different because you're sort of at the moment, you're having to build a quantum chip, essentially, with a series of gates to solve a certain problem. Whereas at the moment, what we do with classical is you're using a general purpose chip and the software does all of the work on the chip. And I think you'll see that happening with quantum. They are working on general purpose quantum chips. But at the moment, if you were Amazon and you wanted to look at your entire supply chain in a way that you can't do with an AI thing, you'll be building some quantum chips. But most growers or food producers are not going to go and build a quantum chip. So they'll be using the more general purpose ones that are coming along. And so for them, the user interface is going to be the same, because the problem, you could think of it as, let's say I'm solving that yield forecasting. So if I'm going to do yield forecasting and I've got a bunch of soil data and a bunch of information on historical metrics around how the apple's grown or whatever it is, I could use an AI algorithm to give you a yield forecast today. But if I do that, you don't really care whether I'm using a knapsack algorithm or Gurobi as a general purpose solver or whatever I'm using in there. You don't really care. You just want to know what the answer is. In the future, I might use a QAOA algorithm, which is a classic quantum optimization algorithm. And again, you don't really care. You just want to know what the answers are. So the interface will be, here are my parameters on my yield and my soil lab files. What should I plant, or what's my yield going to be in the future with this probability? And you'll just get an answer back. Mm-hmm. Just like that.
Are people training? We've had so many people who are training using AI and, not enough. It sounds like there's still lots of jobs for people, but with quantum, is it mostly nerds who don't get out of the lab, or are they training people to commercialize the technology in a way that fits in with products?
I think I don't know the quantum market well enough to say, which organizations are doing which. Yeah. I think what I would say is we see an opportunity from a Swarm perspective in that our real strength is being able to translate a business description of a problem into a running AI system with an algorithm. We actually think we can do exactly the same for quantum. So we see that the approach is going to be the same. So you've still got to define the problem. I need a yield forecast. I need this data. These are the parameters I'm looking at. It's just how you actually structure and write the code underneath it to solve it is very different. Mm-hmm. So I actually think there's an opportunity for us to be someone that can translate between the quantum companies and the businesses. So I see that as a great market opportunity, if I'm honest.
Excellent. So moving a little bit into AI and creativity, and you've written a number of books, nonfiction, fiction. And so you've been quite public about using AI in your writing. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Walk us through your process and how you use AI when you write, and how you found it a good tool and maybe a tool that's kind of lacking.
Yes, I should put my disclaimer up front here, because this is currently a huge issue in the publishing industry. And many authors feel their work is being plagiarized by AI. And actually, there's been an open letter quite recently to the big publishers asking them to ban books that were created with AI. And lots of short story contests, because I write short stories, are actually, there's a checkbox now that says, was this created with AI? In which case, you can't enter the story. And even Amazon, when you publish a book, I was publishing a short story collection a couple of months back. They actually, when you are publishing the book, you have to announce how much AI you used and where you used it in creating the book, which is quite incredible.
Wow.
So I'll be very clear about the approach, but I'll separate what I do on the business side and what I do on the creative side, because I actually use it very differently. Mm-hmm. So on the business side, I use AI all the time. For writing. So I can give a piece of collateral to about our product to the AI, and I can ask it to help me improve the document. I can ask it to add a section, create a business fable about someone using the technology. I can get it to brainstorm marketing ideas. We generate all of the art for our PowerPoints and our website using Midjourney. So, and that means we get a standard, consistent look and feel for everything, because we say, pen and ink style of this type in this way, and we can guarantee it all looks the same and things. So it's much better than flicking through all the stock photography libraries that we used to do in the past.
Yeah.
So typically what I do on a business perspective is I will prompt it, get a first draft even, edit it heavily myself, and then go back and say, right, can you help improve this? What else should I add? What am I missing? And I would say it speeds up my work 2 to 4x on things like. Now with short stories, totally different. So if you look at writing from a creative perspective, there's 2 major processes. One is the creating of it. There's an idea, then there's the creating, and then there's the editing of it. And if you talk to most writers, you'll find ideas aren't really a problem. We don't really need AI for ideas. So I've got, the classic writer's moleskin notebook, and I jot down ideas all the time. Things
you tell me dreams are a good source.
Yeah, exactly. Dreams, people I see, anything just not noted down. And when I'm ready to write, I open it up and there's a whole bunch of ideas, and I might pick a couple, and then I will have I put my Bose headphones on, and I will block out the world, and for an hour or so, I'll just write and create. And you can't edit at the same time. You have to, that trope you see on, a Hallmark movie where someone types a sentence, deletes it, types it, deletes it. That's not how writers work. You just get in and write it. And if you write enough, hopefully there's something there you like that you can then go and edit later. So the writing, the creation is all done by me in a block, normally 1 or 2 blocks to create a short story. And that's the hard bit. After that, then I start to look at the editing, which is actually more fun. It's like a game where you go and play with it a bit. And the editing takes 20 or 30 times longer than the creation. And it can take years to edit a piece to the point you're at. You just keep going back and doing it. And this is where the AI comes in. So I don't use AI directly to make edits. I use AI to act as a really informed reader. So my prompt normally goes along the lines of, you are the New York Times literary editor reviewing this story. What areas do I need to improve to secure publication in your magazine? Even though we all know they never publish anything from their slush pile. Doesn't really matter. And the quality of the response I get from, I should say I typically use ChatGPT for this. And the quality of the response absolutely amazes me every time. And I also like the fact that AI is very flattering. So it says, what a great story. You know, here are a few minor changes you could make to give it a chance of publication. And I get advice on the characters, the narrative structure, you know, any minor grammar issues it spots. But the other thing is,
like notes, like you get little notes.
I get full I get a full report that's like, you know, 2 pages long.
Oh, okay.
Analyzing everything about it. And the thing that's amazing is I used to do that by sending my stories to a couple of trusted readers, like my brother or, you know, an editor I used to work with, people like this. And if you do that, what happens is, A, the feedback's not always as good. It's typically better from
an editor. Yeah.
Yeah. And B, I can take weeks to get the feedback. Yeah. Whereas when I do this, I can go through 4 or 5 cycles with ChatGPT in one evening and just have that instant feedback. So I will say, I'll be completely honest and say I have experimented with letting the AI have a go at writing, but I've not been impressed. So let's say I get that report and it says you probably need a new scene early on to give more background about this particular character. So I might try and say, okay, we'll write that paragraph, but the results just aren't very good. I don't think when I've seen the results, and I'm like, I don't think that's very good, which is why I've stuck with using AI to analyze my writing and offer suggestions, which I then make myself. So that also means when I enter a competition, it says, have you used AI to edit or do this? I'm sort of, nope, because I did it. All the writing is my own writing. And the other thing I would say is the AI, just like people, I don't always agree with what it says about my writing, which is a really important point, because if I just did what it said, then the AI is taking over. But I'm still the writer. So when I get that feedback from a person or the AI, I have to look at it and say, I like that feedback. That's a great idea, but I think that's a terrible idea because you don't understand what I'm trying to do there, or it's just a bad idea and I'm not going to do it. So it's still very much me in control of the writing process. I write every word of my short stories, but I do love the editing and advice. It's like having a great editor who's just on your shoulder saying, oh, are you sure about that paragraph? Or don't we need to tell them more about this person? And I find it, I think it's dramatically changed the way I actually work on a story and how quickly it reaches a publishing standard.
That's really a great use of it. I know when I use it, just even in business writing, or if I'm writing an article or something, and I don't agree with it in some time, but it just, again, for me too, grammar, you know, I wouldn't have caught it. I didn't catch it because I wrote it, you know, and just a lot of those types of things that and one time I wrote something quite large for an article, and I was telling someone, I said, I feel like I cheated because I used all the source material, and but they said, well, if you had someone feeding you information, you just have an assistant. This is just an assistant feeding you information that you told it to go out and get, and only that information, you know.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Yeah, it's really an amazing tool. Well, those are everything that you've talked about, I think hopefully will help listeners just realize the power of AI across so many different ways that it's being used and really changing the way that we do work.
Absolutely. And I think, I know we talked before about writer's voice and what happens.
Yeah.
And I think from a business perspective, I find it's very good at picking up the voice of our documents and doing stuff in the same voice. From a writing perspective, it doesn't worry me because obviously I'm still writing everything myself. But I would say this, while there's a lot of noise in the industry at the moment about, you know, people feeling that AI is ripping them off and all this sort of stuff going on. And I understand where people are coming from that. But I see it very much like photography. So photography, they were seen as a huge threat to artists, especially portrait painters, for obvious reason.
Yeah. Okay.
When it first came to the market. And there was a lot of resistance at that point. But over time, the artists began to see how they could use photography, and some artists started to specialize in it as a unique art form. And I think we're going to see a lot of writers using AI And with some of them, like the way I've been doing it, it'll become a normal way of working as we move forward. But I also think there'll be others who specialize in generating, stories and working and prompting and having something. And I actually do genuinely create stuff. So I was thinking about this the other day because my daughter came back for July 4th with some friends and we went to see the Jurassic Park movie. Okay. And it was fun, but the plot could have been written by AI for all
I've heard that exact critique.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, I was thinking, I don't think it was, because I think if it had been, it might have been more imaginative. Because a lot of the movies today seem to follow the very standard templates. Even the last few Star Wars ones, let's face it, were very much just the template of the earlier ones. So I was thinking of this. I think perhaps AI can be a force for good by partnering with writers. And if you go back to the first big AI thing we saw in recent years, it was AlphaGo, which was, playing Lee Sedol, the world champion at Go. And it came up with moves that nobody had ever imagined were possible. That were just, after several thousand years of people playing Go, it was doing things that no one had ever thought was possible. So I'm thinking maybe we can get movies with original storylines too. So we don't have to watch the same Jurassic Park movie or the same Star Wars movie multiple times.
Yeah.
So I actually think, whilst I understand some of the commercial concerns of mainstream authors, most authors aren't making money, so they don't care so much. But I think ultimately AI will be like photography and just will move into the mainstream and become a way that artists use it as a standard thing.
Great. Well, I think that's a good place to end. Thank you so much. It's always fun to talk to you and look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thanks, Vonnie. Great to be here.